Good morning, everybody. My name is Kristan Weisdack, and I am the CEO and founder of BehaviorWorx of Southwestern PA, where we offer holistic behavior solutions to bring your practice or family from divided to guided. With me today, I have a very special guest, Mandy Keckler. She also works in early intervention with the babies. Now, you have worked in early intervention for a lot longer than I have. So, and I could just tell you attended one of the trainings, and that's how we initially met. And I could tell that you have such a passion for it. And so you have been in OT for how many years now?
Oh gosh. Well, I've been in OT for like 23 years.
Wow. So to
Yes.
explain
I
people that might be watching this, what exactly is an OT? Because I know some people, some parents or folks might not know what that is, because we use a lot of acronyms to tell
Yes,
people what we do,
that's
and they're like,
true.
okay.
Yes, true. So OT stands for occupational therapist. And in a very broad nutshell, the way I like to describe it to people who are totally unfamiliar with occupational therapy is what comes to mind when you think of the word occupation? What is your job? And that really varies across the lifespan. So for me in particular, the job of the people that I work with is eating, growing, playing, learning to interact, beginning to dress themselves. That's their job. That's what they need to do. And so um, anything that I have to do is what can help that process, their occupation, go more smoothly. But with adults, of course, you see other things like occupational therapists might work with someone after a stroke who's not able to feed themselves, or a joint replacement, or there's just a lot of varying areas where OTs can work. But in the early intervention field, it's just development. It's
Yeah.
playing and growing, and it's so fun.
Yeah, I know what we do is just so amazing. So one of the things that we also connected about, not just because of the training and our love for working with babies, but we have also been talking about how May is Celiac Disease Awareness Month. So my family recently got blood work back. My kids have to be gluten-free, dairy-free, and you talked about your journey from that. So tell people about what is celiac disease, if you could start there.
Okay, sure. Yes. So celiac disease it's an autoimmune disorder where your body creates an immune response to gluten. And gluten is a protein, excuse me, commonly found in wheat, barley, and rye. And so your body sees that as something bad and it attacks it. And then that has implications specifically on your small intestine, where it really does some damage there.
Yeah. So there's a lot of kids that I've worked with over the years. I've worked in early intervention for the last 6, but so many of our kids I find eventually need to be gluten-free and dairy-free. So what are some of the things that you have helped the families that you've worked with that have to be gluten-free and dairy-free? It's really like from an occupational therapy standpoint, how do you help a family manage that?
I think, the first step, and I love that this is kind of getting so much more press. My introduction to this was, golly, like 20 years ago, when my sister had some unexplained horrible skin issue, and we found out she had to be gluten free, and we were like, what is gluten? And since then, it's just, it's the awareness is so increased. So I think the first thing that I really want to do with families is just to help them understand why this is important, and what happens when our bodies don't respond well to gluten, what negative things can happen, and then why it's important to manage that. I also like to think, with my families, and remind myself, because personally, my 2 daughters are diagnosed with celiac, and I am as well. And so I remind them and myself that this is manageable. It's a serious issue. It's a medical condition that can cause a lot of problems, but in the big picture of life, this is manageable, and we can do this. It's a modification process and learning to live a little bit differently, but it's possible, and the benefits are worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the key. And one of the behavioral techniques that I work with families is shaping.
Mm.
So one of the ways that I work with families is telling them, let's just work with changing your bread. And then week 2 or 3, let's change. Now you have your bread change, and now let's change your pasta and let's find a substitute for that. So slowly but surely. Um, so you also talked about your personal journey with celiac. And so talk to us about, you talked about your sister, but also your daughter. So how did that progress in your family with your sister and your daughter?
Yeah, well, with my sister, like I said, it was very bizarre. She got like a horrible skin rash, went to doctor after doctor, dermatologist, was finally diagnosed with it's called dermatitis herpetiformis. And at the time they said you need to be gluten-free. And truly, you could not buy a loaf of gluten-free bread. It was an immense amount of research and an undertaking for her. So fast forward, that was like in 2000, I think, around when she was diagnosed. So fast forward to when my daughter, she is going to be 16 next month. And so this was in 2017. So she was around 11. That whole year prior, we had been to the doctor. I'm not joking you, probably at least monthly, if not more. Multiple rounds of antibiotics, strep infection after strep infection, to the point where it got into her blood. She was lethargic, couldn't participate in sports, had pain just with standing and walking in her joints, and nothing was working. And so our family doctor referred us to Children's in Pittsburgh, where we saw a rheumatologist. I think, they were kind of looking at like, is this like a rheumatoid arthritis kind of issue, and on the right track with autoimmune. But the rheumatologist on her presentation said, let me order a celiac panel. Do you have any family history? And I told her about my sister, but I really wasn't thinking celiac, because I think a lot of us, when we think of celiac, we think of like, this is gross, but like diarrhea, horrible bowel issues, vomiting, weight loss. And those are definitely symptoms, but they're not the only ones.
Mm.
And so thank goodness the doctor recognized this, and they ordered the blood test for Abby. And it was sky high. At the time they told us it's called like the transglutamase test. But anyway, they said, well, we're looking for a number of less than 15. That was at the time what was considered the safe range. And Abby's was 228. Yeah.
Wow.
And so immediately they ordered an endoscopy, which is like an internal biopsy of her stomach and intestinal lining. And we didn't even wait for the results. The doctor came out while she was still under anesthesia and said her intestine was completely all but destroyed from what had happened. But there's a good ending, and the good news, and this is what I want to share with people, is it can recover. Like the damage that happened to her intestine, if we were to biopsy it now, we would see a totally different picture.
Oh, that's fantastic. So your family doctor, or you said it was the rheumatologist that sent you for the blood work.
Right.
So, and that's one of the things that I'm passionate about, is trying to get more awareness out there to begin with, because if we can, teach people about what celiac is, what are some of the symptoms and some resources that families can use for earlier detection, right? So they don't have to go through some of the things that we've gone through. My son and my daughter have, sensory sensitivities, and there's some OCD behaviors that they'll engage in, and there's just little kind of quirky behaviors. So like you said, it's not just the TMI, diarrhea or vomiting or some of those things. It can present as behavioral issues, And
Yeah.
so I think that's the big thing to say, if we can create more awareness around this and get more people involved, that we can prevent those things. So do you have any resources for people that might be looking for more information?
Yes. Yeah. And you know what, before I do, the one website I really just love, it's really basic, is celiac.org. And so I'll go on a couple different tangents here with that. But first thing about the behavior thing, I did just, and that's another thing I like to share our personal story, because as an occupational therapist, sometimes I felt like, I'll just say it, I felt a little bit less than at the time because my daughter was taking ADHD meds. I mean, I'm supposed to be able to help kids with attention problems. She was going to counseling. She had been in speech therapy. It wasn't working. She was having mood issues, depression. And I really felt like I was failing. I couldn't even like therapy my own kid. And I'll tell you, her her diagnosis was in May. It was May, incidentally, of 2017. And she was on her medication. In that summer, we started her gluten-free diet. And when we got to Christmas break of that next year, so that would have been early mid-December, she said, "Do you think I could try to stop my medicine?" And I said, "Well, let's talk with our counselor and our doctor." And they all agreed we could try it. And she's never been back on. And so I don't want to mislead that that's like, oh, the end all be all, go gluten-free. But that's the other part of why I'm so passionate is, it really changed her. Her grades went up. Her friendships improved. Clearly she doesn't have joint pain now. She participates in competitive sports. So anyway, that was just like a little aside. But the website it's celiac.com. Or .org rather, because it's, even if you don't necessarily have a celiac diagnosis, like I don't know if your kids do, but there's a lot of the population that might not even test positive on that transglutamase test, but they still have what's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And so on that website, there's this, on the right, when you go to celiac.org, there's a little link you can click called Symptoms Assessment Tool. And that will just guide you through a series of symptoms and maybe point you in the direction, like, is this worth investigating further? Should you request that blood test? That would be the first step in diagnosis.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So then after you work through all the meds and the celiac, we also want to, tell everybody, make sure you're consulting with your health professional, that you're working with, guiding the guidance of a health professional in all this. So after you've gotten this diagnosis, right, that you're gluten-free, how do you shop, right? Let's talk about, once that step has been taken, where do you shop? Like, where do you find your gluten-free foods?
Well, now grocery shopping, we're so blessed. There's so much more readily available. Like I personally shop at Aldi. They have a line like
Live G-free.
Yeah. And I shop at Walmart. I shop at Giant Eagle. So I don't know what stores are in your area. Whoever might be watching, those are the stores that are where I live in Western Pennsylvania. And so one thing that you can do is you can look for the label that says gluten-free. And you can feel pretty confident. I did a little research for this before we spoke, and 98.9% of the products labeled gluten-free were in fact compliant. And so that's a great label to look for. A tricky one though is if it says wheat-free, that doesn't mean gluten-free. So in shopping, I've become a label reader. Another really great thing is that it has to be labeled as an allergen. You know how on food labels, when you read a food label, all of the ingredients are listed in the order that they're contained in the food. At the bottom of every ingredient list, as you read ingredients, it says allergens, and those by law have to be listed in bold. And wheat is an allergen. Like eggs, if anything contains nuts, eggs, wheat, you see those in bold. So that's a really helpful thing. I didn't know that until Abby was diagnosed. Children's Hospital immediately put us in contact with a nutritionist who met with us and really helped us learn about reading food labels and shopping. I was going to tell you something else too on that. The celiac.org, the website, there is a little video where it says gluten-free diet. Again, it's like off to the right side, and it's a nutritionist who has celiac, and she's sharing her experience and just some practical shopping and dining out tips.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Helpful.
Yeah. So because I personally struggle with this too, because I know after I eat gluten is when I wake up in the next morning, I'm irritable, I'm more agitated. So I can see the behavioral changes in myself. So, personally with myself, with my family, with other folks, especially the little babies, the little kiddos that we get to work with in early intervention, just the changes that I've seen anecdotally with families, is amazing. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Mandy. For any other parents that might want to be able to get in touch with you to, talk about what you've been through, what's the best way for them to connect with you, whether it be via, Facebook, or if you have an email address or anything to share?
Yes, sure. I'm on Facebook, Mandy Keckler. My profile is public. So yes, for sure you can find me there. And my email is mandykeckler@gmail.
Okay.
So yes, and that, Facebook is a great resource too. I'm part of a couple of groups for celiac moms. There's all kinds of, whether it's a support group or just informational group of in your local area where to shop, restaurants. So that's a great resource too. But yeah, I'd love
Yeah.
to connect.
Well, for Celiac Disease Awareness Month, I actually have resources on my website as well, BehaviorWorx of Southwestern Pa.com. I have also found some great natural health food stores. Now you're going to pay a little bit more, but one is Herbalicious here in Mount Pleasant, which is about half an hour from where I am, and then we have a gluten-free oven. So they have gluten-free baked goods. So if you can find like a little gem or a treasure like that, I know that they have, I think it's Sunnybridge out in Washington, PA. So there's always different ways that you can search for like celiac or gluten-free shopping or gluten-free stores near me or something like that. So yeah, but we're here to guide you on your journey. If you need any more assistance, we look forward to hearing from you. You can reach out to me as well at BehaviorWorx, BehaviorWorxPA at gmail.com. And feel free to reach out to Mandy to talk more about her journey. So thank you so much for joining us, Mandy.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
All right. Bye-bye.